Alright everyone, time for another little bit of a political philosophy video with regards to the cringe fringe left. Now, when we discuss the cringe fringe, I do not necessarily mean the grift left. They're kind of separate. The grift left is more people who I don't even know if they're authentically leftist or if they're just pretending to make money, to make more donations. That's one component. And then you've got like the generic progressive or liberal groups, and it's not the same as the cringe fringe. The cringe fringe is like the really out there, like the Antifa and BLM types. People who will get a Bernie Sanders tattoo, people who do slam poetry on their iPhones right before they go with their wife's boyfriend to Starbucks, stuff like that. It can be kind of stereotypical, and it can be funny just to mock people that are that strange. I realize that's hyperbolic and it is stereotyping, but it seems to be true an uncommon lot, and it can be, again, almost humor within humor at that point. But I was thinking about how actually, when you really get down to it, there are an awful lot of behavioral and ideological similarities between the really cultish cringe fringe of the left, you know, the 10% of the left that would, I think, fit into that category. You know, some millions of people that are really out there and they actually want to ban cow farts because AOC is their goddess and whatever she says is automatically canonical. Or they think she's not far left enough, and they're like, well, you know, Stalin got it right most of the time, but he still had some reactionary tendencies, and we've got to make Reddit posts about a Tumblr blog post or something. And they have a lot in common with evangelicals. Now, when I refer to evangelicals, I'm not talking about like you're a religious Christian and I'm lumping you in. I'm talking about certain cult-like tendencies among certain groups, especially those that gravitate around a strongman single figure. Because you see the same basic mentality. You see almost a form of hero worship aimed at individuals who are leftist, who in many cases, I'm telling you, they're grifters. A lot of the leftist leadership, they're not even really left. They play one on TV and they get a lot of money for it. Elon Omar, great example. Look at all the millions of dollars getting pumped into a corporation, a for-profit capitalistic entity, in name only, I realize, that's run by her husband and, you know, faces, I guess, a probe at this point. Doesn't sound very leftist to me. Oh yeah, that's $2.8 million. Hey, by the way, I care about the poor. Or AOC, like, pretending that she's like Jenny from the Bronx. Oh, I mixed drinks. And oh, maybe I won't run again because people keep being mean to me and doing, like, you know, cringy shit like that. Dear Kitty, you don't need to readjust my camera angle, by the way. Thank you. There's a lot, though, in common with certain evangelical cultish groups. And not just that. There's cognitive dissonance as well. And you've probably seen this. If you try talking to someone who believes that they'll go to hell forever if they deviate from certain scriptural elements or whatever their pastor said, and you try to convince them that they're wrong, then even if they can be proven observably incorrect, objectively incorrect, they'll glaze over. They won't accept that. They'll figure out some way to, in their minds, reconcile an irreconcilable worldview where their reality is clearly wrong, but they still consider it correct. You see this among the left all the time. When you show them statistics, when you show them historical fact, when you show them observable fact, for instance, if you show them footage of Antifa engaged in terroristic activities, they will immediately revert with their cognitive dissonance to, well, the right wing is the one with the militias that cause terrorism. I read about it on MSN. The problem is, of course, you can explain to them the scenario. You can say, well, yeah, of course, because when you operate in these cities and you have DAs that let these people go without charges, if the person is not charged and therefore can't be found guilty, you're not going to see it in stats about terroristic crime. It's not going to exist. So the fact that the SPLC or the ADL will compile those numbers in order to proclaim that the far right is the only group that engages in extremism is clearly wrong. It's a statistical anomaly that has to do with differential enforcement. You can observe this. It's quite obvious. We have stories on a weekly basis of people, and Andy Ngo is the best at compiling this, which is why they're constantly threatening his life and attacking him. Apparently Antifa thinks all Asians look alike, by the way, because they'll attack like random Asian people and claim it's Andy Ngo, and he chuckles about this routinely. It's happened on multiple occasions. So then instead, when they see that there's an observable reality there, when he says, well, here's the 5 cases today that the DA dropped, and even though here's video of this person throwing a bomb, but they're not up on charges, that's an observable reality. That should be compiled as a terroristic crime, but they're not charged. There's a reason why they claim that he's a reactionary Nazi. Again, despite the fact that he's Asian, they've become the whitest non-white people according to the left now, to the point where they're like, oh well, East Asians are not really people of color. They're like a white people of color. It gets weird. And that's the other thing, you get weird linguistic terminology. Evangelicals do this. The other thing I would say is victimhood mentality. If you talk to people who are evangelical Christians in the United States, really hardline evangelicals, and trust me, I have. I went through a period where I was a religious Christian, although I didn't take it to that logical extent. They constantly talk about how they're persecuted even when Christianity is the largest religion in the world by far. We are constantly persecuted. Why? Well, we're not allowed to deny gays marriage in the civil state. We're being persecuted because women have the ability to purchase birth control. We're being persecuted because Walmart didn't put a Christmas tree up with a Jesus manger and instead they had a happy holiday sign. Bill O'Reilly used to do this and he's not even hyper-religious. He's a corporate, conservative. He's more like a Limbaugh sort. Every goddamn year it was the war on Christmas. It was sort of like Glenn Beck talking about George Soros. You see it all the time, a victimhood mentality. It's us versus them, we're being put upon and suppressed. You see this with the left all the time. Oh my God, says the trust funder with their iPad, connecting to a very capitalistic internet, by the way, developed by the U.S. military with public funding. I'm being suppressed because I have student loan debt. Student loan debt is drowning people, says the person who's, making $60,000 as an associate's professor in some ivory tower. Oh my God, see, they've risen up to the middle class. Maybe the upper middle class is still bitching about these things that they no longer experience. It's a victimhood mentality. And it's funny because sometimes there's an irreconcilable juxtaposition within the victimhood mentality. So you'd say, like, we need to give the government more tax funding, more money to pay for welfare programs, but at the same time they'll claim that the government is imperialistic, evil, and is using money to bomb people. But they think that the system that they claim is fundamentally broken to the point where it needs to be burned to the ground and rebuilt from the ground up can actually be used to solve their problems. Again, you get a lot of contradictions within non-working ideologies. I would say hardline evangelicals do that. They contravene one another. Like they would say, well, we need to give the government the power to put women back in the kitchen or to deny property contracts to gay people. But that same government, they'll say, well, they're abandoning our greatest ally and we're going to reap hellfire for it. They spend all the money on war instead of, building churches and stuff, and Jesus, wants us to live in peace. And you get this weird mentality where they'll say one thing, say another thing, they directly contravene one another, and yet it's considered a feasible worldview. Another thing is peer pressure. The amount of peer pressure that leftists apply to one another is funny, and this begins a purity spiral. People on the right have done this too. This isn't, even necessarily religious people as much. Generic right-wing groups, if they're far enough out there, they tend to have a lot of in-group peer pressure. So you'd have a situation like, look at me. I am perceived by many people as being right-wing. Now, I don't class myself as that. I'm a libertarian. On certain moral issues, I think I'm to the left of Bernie Sanders. That being said, I'm perceived of as being right-wing. Both people who are more left than me and people who are more right than me call me a fence sitter, therefore, and say, you need to pick a side. There's an attempt at peer pressuring me to artificially modify my belief system and throw in with one side or the other based on the fact that the other side is worse or bad or evil or something. Evangelicals do this too. So they'd go up to maybe a liberal Christian, try to convert them. The Jehovah's Witnesses do this. If the Jehovah's Witnesses, who tend to be hyper-religious, come to your door, you say, oh yeah, I believe in Jesus. Oh no, you don't believe in him the way that we believe in him. Read our Jehovah's Witness, read the Watchtower or something. You see it all the time. Also, there's a false claim of divine right that's always associated with it. Usually if you have either a dictatorial or oligarchic strong figure. So if you have like an elder council sort of thing and they make the decisions for a hyper-religious community, or if you have a televangelist, one of those Jesus folks that basically does a Beto O'Rourke and gyrates around on stage and stuff. You see Peter Popoff, Ted Haggart, who, was fucking gay hookers on crack and meth and was a big anti-drug, anti-gay marriage advocate for a while. Billy Graham. I know some people have a soft spot for him, but fuck, I think he's dead now, so I can say, don't say that. Charles Stanley, although he's more low-key, But he is a televangelist. He goes up there, wears a $2,000 suit, and then talks about charity for the poor. For $500, you can take a cruise with Charles Stanley. It's that stuff like Joyce Meyer, things like that. You get these situations where you have a sort of... They don't even necessarily have to claim some sort of divine right, but they're ascribed it by the more religious adherents. You get this on the left, with some of the grift leftists are held up sort of on a pedestal to the point where they can say weird shit that is completely incoherent and or completely talentless and or outright evil. I think that we can think of some situations fairly recently of this from certain elements of far left dumb in the e-celeb world, and yet it doesn't matter. Their fans literally don't care. Even if you confront them with objective evidence that the person they're following is a sleazeball who doesn't even fucking believe in their own belief system, it literally doesn't matter. Now, some of that is just because it's also entertainment. And televangelists capitalize on this too. You watch the televangelists, it's not just, oh, I can feel the holy, holy wave of power. A lot of those people in the audience are there for the show. They want to run around and pretend to speak in tongues and you know, handle snakes and shit like that. It's almost like a religious panic or something like that. It can be kind of a spiritual, it's sort of like a rock concert. You get that same thing on a more low-key level with the left. Now, most of them aren't very charismatic, and so it's more difficult perhaps for them. But insofar as a person can be reasonably well-spoken, yeah, you can get a similar sort of experience. Yeah. So I would just say, in closing, after that rant, yeah, you can see there are a lot of similarities between the two. Now, authoritarian, highly centralized systems tend to spawn things like that. Victimhood mentality is used among actual fascist groups as well. While we're being suppressed out of existence, our people will disappear, therefore take up arms, that sort of thing. And sometimes, of course, not every claim of victimhood is necessarily wrong. There can be actual suppression. Pro-freedom movements are regularly suppressed by Silicon Valley. That's an objective fact. But if you got a group where you're like, well, donate $4.99 to this GoFundMe, we're fighting a legal battle against Twitter that we can't possibly win or something, you can get opportunists there as well. And that's the other end, is that groups like this, fanatic groups, they tend to be used by opportunists. We see a microcosm of this with every moral panic. We see it right now with COVID. COVID's got everyone in a panic. So governments, which tend to be centralized, authoritarian, I would say outright tyrannical in some cases, they want to appropriate more power. They use people's fear against them. A person's fear and paranoia is the easiest way to control them. If you can get a person afraid of the dark, afraid of the stuff that's out there in the woods, maybe they'll elect you tribal leader. You're the man with the big stick. You're like, hey, don't worry about it. I'll keep the boogeymen away. As long as you give me more coconuts, I'll do a spell and the boogeymen won't be able to go past the tree line. Now, of course, there's no fucking boogeymen. But if you can convince people in that, hey, I got more coconuts. I got bananas and mangoes and shit. You know, we're talking about maybe a cargo cult tropical island or something like that. This sort of stuff happens. It also happens in very civilized, totally urban, highly educated societies. Some of the most easily manipulated people are the most academically gifted out there, the highest functioning. Especially because they get it into their heads, oh, maybe I can change things, you know, I'm a scientist, I'm a great general or something, I can make a difference, and then someone says, yeah, you can. Here, I can help you. And of course, that person's a sleazeball. And so you can get a usurping of people's normal and usually benevolent faculties. Most people don't go out of their way to try to do evil. More evil is done in the name of good than in evil. That's about all. Peace out.